My practice is participating in a REACH ACO. I understand that there may be MIPS liabilities for some of our providers. Can you explain that?
Great question, Katherine. There are three pathways by which a provider in your practice might have a MIPS liability. Under the REACH ACO, NPI providers working and billing under the same tax ID TIN practice are not necessarily all participating in the REACH ACO. Participation is an offer made to individual NPI providers by the ACO and accepted or not by the individual provider. Your practice might have a mix. Mixed liabilities for your providers participating in the REACH ACO will be governed by the rules and thresholds pertaining to qualified participant or QP status. The first pathway is non-participation. All providers in your practice not participating in the ACO will have a MIPS liability unless there's an exception for which they qualify, like the new provider exception or the low volume exclusion. The second pathway is qualified participant or QP status. Those providers participating in the REACH ACO will be evaluated for their volume participation, which will sort them into three categories: qualified participant, partially qualified participant, and not qualified. Volume is analyzed in two ways: by number of patients or by dollar amount of Medicare payments. For the 2023 participation year, if at least 50% of Medicare Part B payments are generated for 2023 through the REACH ACO, or at least 35% of distinct Medicare Part B beneficiaries are seen through the REACH ACO, then the provider is a qualified participant, or QP, and has no MIPS requirements and no option for voluntary participation. If the participant does not qualify as a QP, but at least 40% of Medicare Part B payments are generated for 2023 through the REACH ACO, or at least 25% of distinct Medicare Part B beneficiaries are seen through the REACH ACO in 2023, then the provider is a partial QP. A partial QP must decide whether to participate in MIPS or not. Participants who do not meet either threshold have a MIPS liability unless there's an exception for which they qualify, like the new provider exception or the low volume exclusion. To sum it up, the three pathways to MIPS are: providers who are in your practice but not participating in the ACO have a MIPS liability. Providers in your practice participating in the ACO but below the partial QP volume benchmarks have a MIPS liability. These two pathways have no choice. Unless they have another exclusion, they will be scored on MIPS or suffer the full 9% adjustment if they do not make a MIPS submission. Third, partial QPs. These providers decide. Before the end of the performance year, they are required to choose to participate in MIPS or not. If they do not, there are no penalties. If they choose to participate, they are fully subject to the MIPS adjustment based on their total MIPS score. If your practice is in a REACH ACO, you're going to need a MIPS strategy. Thanks, Katherine.